Welcome, everyone. Good morning. We're delighted that you're joining us today, both in person and online. And for those who are online, we just want to mention we're starting a little bit late because of the weather in Washington, D.C. this morning and the tangle of a commute that it always presents when we get a little bit of rain. This conference convened today in collaboration with Paul Hastings, LLP, is a culmination of a series of online events that we began here at the law school in the fall of 2020. During one of the most intense periods of the pandemic, our keynote speaker, Kevin Hyland, and others joined us for a program on the impact of the global pandemic on workers and global supply chains. Since then, we've hosted events focused on a variety of topics, including global business initiatives to address human rights issues, the corporate responsibility of small businesses, faith perspectives on business and human rights, and visions of how the public and private sectors can work together to end labor exploitation in global supply chains. In keeping with our mission at the school to promote the human dignity of all people, we hope to continue working with scholars and members of the public and private sectors from around the world to help shine a light on the plight of some of the world's most vulnerable people, and to explore ways in which we can all work together for a better future for all people in a challenging but robust global economy. We have an amazing array of participants today. You represent the academy, government, business, human rights groups, religious traditions, labor organizations, and a host of NGOs, among other things, engaged in the work of saving lives. This is an issue that I'm sure is close to many of our hearts, arguably one of the most important issues of our day. The fact that modern slavery exists on this earth, labor exploitation, and the types of issues that you all address every day still exists as an affront to God. God is everywhere, including quite literally right above our heads in the tabernacle in our school's chapel. We have to be God's hands, God's voice to find secure justice for these vulnerable peoples. And we're so happy that you could join with us today in our small contribution with Paul Hastings, our co-sponsors. So thank you for joining us. Let me introduce you to the force at our school behind this conference. That's the director of our Compliance Investigations and Corporate Responsibility Program, Professor Sarah Duggan. Sarah teaches in the areas of compliance and corporations, constitutional law, corporate responsibility, and human rights compliance. Prior to joining the law school faculty, she was a corporate general counsel and a partner at the esteemed law firm Williams & Connolly in town. She's also an Episcopal priest who serves part-time at a parish and has worked with women's groups and social entrepreneurs, both in the United States and in Honduras. So welcome to the conference, and I introduce to you Professor Sarah Duggan.
Thank you so much, Dean Payne. And again, welcome to all of you who are here in person, and welcome to all of you who are with us online. I'd like to begin today by introducing three colleagues who have been instrumental in putting together this program and who you will be seeing throughout the rest of the day. So first, my colleagues Tara Junta and Renata Paras. Could you stand up just so we They are, you can find all the bios in the program, but Tara is a CUA alumna and vice chair of Paul Hastings Investigations and White Collar Defense Practice, as well as co-chair of the firm's Global Diversity Council and co-lead of the firm's ESG practice. Renata is Paul Hastings Environmental, Social, and Governance Counsel and Global Pro Bono Counsel. She formerly served as Deputy Chief Counsel of the United States Department of Homeland Security. They have done so much to make this possible. So thank you both so much. And the other person that I really would like you to meet is our Senior Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, Mary Brawleary. Please stand, Mary. Mary is a recognized expert in criminal law, exploitation, human trafficking, and missing persons. She's been a federal prosecutor, deputy director for the Office of Legal Counsel of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and is director of the National Center for the Prosecution of Child Abuse. Mary's also the leader of the Bakita initiative at the law school, and I hope that you will learn a lot more about that initiative. It's an initiative for the study and disruption of modern-day slavery that is endeavoring to produce applied research to disrupt global trafficking. So it's important, it's new, it's energetic, and we hope you all talk to Mary about that as the day goes on. Or if you're online, email her, leary@law.edu. So as Dean Payne said, my colleagues and I are honored that you are joining us today. We recognize that you all really do amazing and important work, but we're also well aware that we still have more than 40 million people who are caught in the chains of modern day slavery, including some 29 million women and girls. The exploitation of vulnerable people, including millions of children, continues to be a persistent and tragic reality of global supply chains. Those of us gathered here are here today from many different backgrounds and sectors, as Dean Payne pointed out, but we share a passion for eradicating the suffering of men and women who have little hope of a decent life and of little girls and boys who lose their childhood. And I'd like to start this conference with asking us all to take just a moment to remember and think about all of those who are victimized by modern day slavery and human trafficking while we are here on a rainy day, but cozy inside this room. Let's just take a moment. So today, we invite you all to make new connections with the Academy and with each other as we seek to strengthen efforts to disrupt human rights abuses in global supply chains. We hope that this conference is just the beginning of an ongoing project that will help support what you are already doing and produce resilient connections and concrete actions. And now to shift just for a moment to a few logistics. We have a program will continue with a break right around 11. Then we will have lunch for those here in the atrium. We will take a brief pause for those of you online during that lunch, but then we will continue with a program during the lunch. And then we also, for those interested, will have a working group for 2 hours on Friday morning here at the law school. Restrooms are down the hall. Wi-Fi is CUA guest, no password required. And because we have such a packed program, we are going to be doing things a little bit differently with respect to questions. We have index cards in baskets up here, so you might want to grab a couple for during our program. If you have questions, please write them down so that we can collect them. We'll get to as many as we can. If we don't get to them, we promise some kind of follow-up. For those of you online, please email your questions to Duggan@cua.edu. That's DUGGIN@cua.edu. And we have someone monitoring that address to know about your questions. And we'll do our best again to answer them, or at least collect them and answer them and follow up. And now I have the honor of introducing Ms. Carmita Hedman-Sequeira. And Carmen is going to introduce our keynote speaker, the Honorable Kevin Hyland, O.B.E. Kevin is someone to whom many of us are connected in all sorts of different ways. And the reason we are connected to Kevin, who's such a wonderful worker for human rights around the world, is because of Carmita. Carmita is someone who makes things happen. And she deserves the credit for making the connections that led to this conference and a lot of other good things. Born and raised in Latin America and the recipient of degrees from leading institutions in both the US and Europe, and with many years as a judicial interpreter, Carmita and her husband have lived around the world and worked with people caught in the snares of poverty in both India and Sri Lanka. And she's also worked with families in need here in the United States and is currently helping people who are desperately in need of medical care in Ukraine and among Ukrainian refugees. I'm proud to say that Carmita is an alumna of our law school, and I'm delighted to welcome her to the podium.
Good morning. I left my notes here and I don't see. Good morning. At the age of 8, our speaker was the youngest ever winner of the Metropolitan Police Help the Police competition run by Scotland Yard. So, becoming a senior detective some years later was almost inevitable. Following 30 years in policing, including leading London's human trafficking unit, in 2014, Mr. Kevin Hyland was appointed as the United Kingdom's first independent anti-slavery commissioner and served as commissioner with distinction until 2018. He was awarded the Order of the British Empire in the Queen's 2015 New Year's Honors. Mr. Hyland authored United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 8.7 and led efforts to include the eradication of human trafficking within the UN's 15-year global goals. He has driven international and domestic efforts in the fight against human trafficking, advising governments, businesses, and multilateral organizations. Mr. Hyland is currently Ireland's representative to the Council of Europe, independent group of experts for trafficking, and chairs both the Responsible Recruitment Group of the Institute of Human Rights and Business and the Island of Ireland Human Trafficking Project. He also provides strategic leadership to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in producing global victim support guidance. Please help me welcome the Honorable Kevin Hyland.
Thank you very much, Carmita. And some people might say my achievement at 8 years of age was the best thing I did in Scotland Yard, but I would challenge that. So Dean Payne, esteemed guests, can I start by thanking Sarah Duggan and her team for organising this event and for Carmita for putting us all in touch. So much we know in the world can be solved by people getting in touch and having common ideas for good. Human trafficking has been a global priority for over 20 years. The first international drive at the United Nations was the Palermo Protocol in 2000. At the same time, the United States legislation, the Trafficked Victims Protection Act, introduced many measures in the US, but it also created global awareness and influence through the annual Trafficking in Persons report, with 4 tier gradings and the potential for sanctions for defaulters on tier 3. Since that time, we have seen the outcomes of efforts rise and fall. In recent years, prosecutions have fallen and impunity for perpetrators appears to become greater. And what is the cost to victims? And what can be done to change these trends and improve responses, and in particular, prevention? For example, the Council of Europe Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings entered force on the 1st of February 2008. While building on existing international instruments, the convention goes beyond the minimum standards upon and strengthens the protection afforded to victims. And the EU introduced similar directive. The Council of Europe Convention has a comprehensive scope of application, encompassing all forms of trafficking, both national or transnational, linked or not linked to organised crime, and taking in all persons who are victims of trafficking, women, men, and children. This convention provides for a series of rights for victims of trafficking, in particular, the right to be identified and recognised as a victim, to be protected and assisted, to be given a recovery and reflection period, to be granted a renewable residence permit, to receive compensation for the damages suffered, business responsibilities in demand and reducing that demand, and introducing a punishment of non-punishment principle. I'm sure you will agree that this sounds like an excellent template, and surely nations who have ratified this convention must be doing well. Well, despite this and many international instruments and national commitments and action plans and policies that should address human trafficking, they are all too often reframed diluted, or even ignore best practices developed from years of experience, and importantly, from the voices of those who have been experienced exploitation. One area of experience I will talk about, particularly having worked with them across the world, are sisters, religious sisters, some of who join us today, and projects like Metanoia in Louisiana, which is run by Father Jeff O.B.E, who's with us here. These projects are ongoing, and we need to listen to the work they are doing. Trafficking sees perpetrators gifted impunity, while suffering is endured by millions of people, and the ill-gotten gains believed to exceed over 150 billion US dollars a year continue to increase. Understanding where and how someone might be a victim is crucial, but also is how does it happen? And importantly, what can be done to prevent it? But this requires a proactive system, a model of approach that looks at the entire system, not merely tokenistic with no substance or sustainability. Sadly and frustratingly, measures still elude this challenge of proactivity. Statements are made, but have little ability to eliminate the potential of exploitation. There is a much needed focus on supply chains, and efforts should continue to look at root causes. But these efforts should also place a basis for reparation, a provision for support funded by those who profit, and proper means for accountability. Currently, transparency legislation and business responses consist of the preparation of statements of intent without real monitoring or real transparency. Moving from self-referential thinking is difficult for anyone, including businesses, but it is crucial if we want to stop exploitation and human rights abuses. The Organization for Security and Coordination in Europe annual conference happened this week in Vienna. One of the things they were looking at was the support available to victims and how victims should be protected. A new guidance was developed, which US Congress Representative Chris Smith, the lead for Trafficking Victims Protection Act, called the best so far. This gives guidance and clarity of what governments need to provide to introduce what's called a national referral mechanism. This should importantly be trauma-informed and have a systemic response. And this guidance applies to business as well as just governments. An effective national referral mechanism requires commitment from many state actors, including from health, children's services, police, prosecutors, judiciary, local authorities, places of detention, border protection, and immigration services. But all that needs to be mirrored by businesses with policies that proactively identify risks of a potential victim being created, those environments where they are, and how you address that to prevent anyone from being exploited, harbored, recruited, or transported. Crucial to these policies is that safety and support is not conditional to assisting the state or tied to a business agreement, including one of non-disclosure. There are 5 main pieces of legislation that exist today across the world to address supply chains. There's the US Customs and Border Protection Act, brought in by the Tariff Act of 1908. This allows the United States Customs and Border Protection to ban imports of items or the trading of items in the US that have been made at the hands of slavery or exploitation. Some have seen this as a sledgehammer approach, but it is a clear way of objecting to forced labor or children being exploited in work. The legislation has limitations though, as in the case during the pandemic when the US banned the purchase of gloves and PPE equipment from Malaysia on a petition which showed that there was child labor in the manufacturing of those goods. Canada also halted federal imports due to human rights abuse concerns. Yet the United Kingdom still agreed multi-million contracts and still is, and providing materials to the National Health Service. This is now subject of a court case in the United Kingdom. Next is Section 54 of the UK Modern Slavery Act, which requires companies over the size of 36 million per year to complete a statement on measures to combat slavery in their supply chain. In reality, the slavery statement can contain just one word of what they're doing, which can be nothing. And that would be compliant as long as the board agreed it and it was placed on their website. Whilst this is unlikely for a company to do that, instead, what many have done is actually do nothing, not even do a statement. And despite the fact that the Secretary of State has a power to issue an injunction, in the 7 years since that legislation came in, not one injunction has been put in place. Furthermore, when I was commissioner, I identified companies who failed to meet the mere basics of the Act, yet were still awarded lucrative government contracts. There is a plan to change some of that Act, but it's still a voluntary requirement, and it's not seen as a crucial requirement of business conduct. The Australian Modern Slavery Act came in 2018, and it's an advanced version of the UK legislation. It provides a central repository which federal and state governments consult before awarding procurement contracts. The New South Wales legislation has also brought in the role of a commissioner to oversee business compliance within their own local legislation. France has due diligence legislation requiring business to prevent human rights abuses and allows for action to be taken by individuals or organisations. And the EU has conflict minerals legislation introduced in January 2021, aimed to prevent mining of selected minerals where child labour is used or where it is found to fund child soldiers. The minerals involved are tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold. So the products that are in our cars, our computers, our phones. But what impact has that had? Very little. As we know, children are still dying in the mines of the Congo or being exploited in the rubber farms of Liberia. So most of these legislation powers have really had some impact, but not at the scale that they should be. In the pipeline is new legislation from Germany due to come online in January 2023. This will have sanctions available, which will be up to 4% of the company's turnover. Entry into it is set at 466 million per year, so large companies. There is criticism of the high level of entry, but this will be the first time that penalties will be a risk for business. In other areas of compliance, such as data protection, health and safety, food standards, financial regulations, and emissions, there are well-established penalties for breaches. In fact, British Airways were fined for not protecting data properly. Nothing important was particularly lost, but they got a fine of 6 million euros in the UK. Or one of the internet companies was given a very large fine in Ireland for data protection breaches. And a car manufacturer was fined billions of dollars for fiddling emissions results here in the United States. So why is it when it comes to things that we use or things that are about us that we take it very seriously? But when it's about vulnerable people who we may never meet, who may be on the other side of the world, but then maybe in the southern states of the United States, or maybe in the East Midlands of the UK, or in Dublin, in Ireland. Why is it when it's vulnerable people, we tend to look away? So when it comes to the exploitation of children, women, and men, some of this is in some of the most lucrative businesses in the world, yet there is little accountability. And the fear of reputational damage is not working. We often talk about it, but we've seen businesses that have been on the front pages, but it doesn't really affect their share prices. So we need to make sure that we break down those gaps. Serious flaws exist in human trafficking responses, gaps that we wouldn't accept if it was about us. Examples of those gaps: I have personally seen a case where a child was imprisoned as an adult for document offences, yet it was obvious that she was a minor. And the entire system in the UK looked the other way to her trafficking and her multiple rapes, a 14-year-old girl. Or when a woman was imprisoned for cultivation of over a million euros worth of drugs, despite discussions in the court that she was trafficked and forced into watering and minor contraband by a serious organised crime group, at great risk to her health and in fear of her life. Nothing happened other than she was sent to prison. The traffickers in both those cases were granted impunity by the state. Accountability must be introduced to make this a crime that is not worth allowing to happen, and where looking the other way is not permissible. If we truly want equality and to end this serious abuse of our fellow human beings, this crime should never pay. And any profits that emanate from this abhorrent human rights violation should be confiscated and used for reparation and to prevent this crime from occurring in the first place. Technology companies, multinationals, and governments in their procurement have a duty. Indeed, in the case of governments, it's our taxes, and none of them have authorized governments to spend our money on organized crime or to allow organized crime. So government procurement, which is $1 in $5 spent in the world, must address this issue. And in fact, it was committed at the G20 as a leadership recommendation, both in Argentina, Tokyo, and in Saudi Arabia. So unless all the incentives are removed to be involved in trafficking and the consequences are real, then unfortunately, history has shown that nothing will change. When President Lincoln was trying to restore the Union, he believed that abolishing slavery in the southern states of America was crucial. And it was the people in Manchester, England, where cotton was produced, who provided him with the means to end this abuse when they refused to buy cotton harvested in the fields of slavery. Despite these people being some of the poorest, some of the most challenged, the people of Manchester, through their cooperative, wrote to President Lincoln to provide their support. Lincoln wrote where he said, "Their sublime Christian heroism, which has not been surpassed in any age or country." So these were some of the poorest who assisted in bringing to an end the Civil War and slavery and the re-establishment of the Union here. It is well overdue for the privileged and the wealthy to follow the example and for nations to deliver through regulations and accountability, to follow that example of people who go before us. The world has committed to 17 global targets, the Sustainable Development Goals, including the eradication of human trafficking and child labour. As part of that, states and business should deliver effective measures of accountability to stop this crime in the first place. There's a great deal of speculation, research, consternation, and prevarication on how to address human trafficking. The time has come for action, as if we do not act in our generation, the fragility of this world, which we see is under such poor stewardship, will only worsen. As policymakers, leaders, and people of goodwill, we have a choice, and that choice is with us. Sadly, those who are exploited do not have a choice, so the responsibility is ours, and the decision is ours whether we want to eradicate this or whether we just want to be part of its continuance. Thank you very much.